I am welcoming back Nathan Leehman. We've been talking a lot before the show started. So, Nathan, why don't you just go ahead and give us your introduction and let us know how you're doing today?
Sure thing, Aaron. I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. I am the owner of the Ultra Running Company in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm, I guess, a longtime trail runner and distance runner, and also spend, I guess, since I'm in Charlotte, most of my training time on the road. So I get as many miles in as I can, and as we've seen in the past, love to talk about shoes, running, anything that gets us excited.
Absolutely. And how long have you been in the run industry?
We opened the Ultra Running Company in December of 2013. And so that was I had no previous retail experience. I hadn't worked anywhere else. Kind of probably not the smartest thing to do, but was our passion. And I felt like we're talking about shoes the way that we'll be talking about them today, and talking about running the way that you have to talk about it if you're going to try and find the right shoes for folks. I felt like there was a gap in the market for that, and so we kind of learned on the run, and we're still around and having a great time.
Awesome. Yeah, and we should preface this conversation by saying some of the things that we're going to talk about are our opinions. Some of the things we're going to talk about are factual. And so if you hear something that you don't agree with, that's fine. Like you can let us know. We appreciate any feedback or whatever you have to say about footwear. But Nathan and I come to the table. We wear different shoes. We have our own concepts of what we like, but we also have concepts of what's functional and what should be under somebody's foot for certain things, and that's either what we've experienced or our experience through retail. So Nathan, why don't you just kind of start us off? What do you see going on in the footwear industry right now? What's the big, last time I think we talked, it was we were talking about like some super shoes and the foams and stuff, but what are some of the concepts you're seeing right now?
For sure, those are still a huge part of what's going on. I think every once in a while you have these paradigm shifts in the market. So for a while it was yeah, minimalism with Born to Run. When that book came out, everyone wanted to go barefoot all the time, and it's interesting because running stores often act almost like an anchor on some of that, because a lot of people that have been in the industry for decades have their own opinions, have their own experiences, and have seen things come and go. And so I remember when the minimalist movement came out, you go in a running store and they'd kind of laugh at it. They'd be like, that's great. If you want to go, if you want to see your podiatrist next, then definitely run barefoot today. But over time, that kind of started into the market. Uh, Kind of juxtaposition against that was then Hoka came out, and all of a sudden Hoka said, yeah, we're going to take some of the aspects of minimal running, things like a lower heel to toe offset, a lower drop, and we're going to respect that portion of what's going on right now, but we're going to add a lot of cushion under you, and we're going to talk about things like rockers, and we'll talk about all those today, and so that really led the market. I'd say, honestly, the entrance of Hoka 10 years ago or so changed the market fundamentally, where everyone was trying to catch up with Hoka. And in a sense, people are still trying to do that. Doesn't mean that every Hoka shoe is the best shoe out there. It just means that they've kind of set the standard for how other people are thinking about shoes, and they've gained market share over that time period as well. There's other things that have come into the market in the last couple of years, these super shoes, these carbon plated shoes, new materials. I think hard to argue that anyone but Nike led that. And still, my belief is that if you're going to, the fastest shoes on the market are probably the Nikes right now. Everyone else has a super shoe, and you read studies that say, okay, this particular one is faster on this particular athlete than this. But I think everyone's now trying to catch up with Nike in that regard. Or actually, I'll be more specific when I talk about Nike, because they have so many shoes. They're trying to catch up with specific Nikes.
Correct.
Their Alpha
Right.
Flies, their percent shoes, and so everyone now, the big trend in the market is, let's throw a carbon plate in anything we can find. Let's make everything a race shoe, and maybe allow that to trickle down to other folks. And so we've seen a lot of, I think, the carbon fiber plates. They're coming out with even more amazing carbon fiber plates. Carbon fiber plates that will bend in one direction but not in the other, where typically carbon fiber was just this unbendable material. They're using materials like PIBA and that really bounce a lot. I did leave out there that for a while in that bouncy category, I think it was Adidas that had the bounciest foam out there. At the time, it was also super heavy, and so you'd have these shoes that would bounce all over the place. And what Nike did with their 4% shoe is they took a material that bounced a lot but was also super lightweight. And they took some of the things Hoka was doing with their rockers and put that in to make these super fast shoes. What's really important to know, though, for the average user is that having this super fast race day shoe does not mean that you need to be wearing a super fast race day shoe every day, or for some of us, any day.
Mm-hmm.
I've been at trail races where people are using 4% shoes, and it's just not a good shoe for an aggressive trail race. It gives you 4% more energy, but that doesn't mean a thing on a trail. So you got to be really careful about where you're adding all these really cool technical aspects, and make sure that it's actually appropriate for the shoe that you're using. We'll definitely talk about that a little bit with the trail shoes today, because some of this road technology is working its way into trail technology, and we're having fits and starts with that as well. So I'd definitely say this is the season of like more cushion, more bouncier cushion. Everybody's shoe, you're seeing shoes bouncing up against like 40 millimeters of cushion in the heel, which is just, I say things like absurd in a good way sometimes, but it's absurd to have 40 millimeters of cushion under your heel.
That's a lot of cushion.
That doesn't mean I'm not going to take advantage of it sometimes, but it's kind of taken things to the extreme. And in certain cases, you've got Olympic standards and I guess sport legal stuff where they are capping that amount, but that doesn't apply to shoes that are just being used for running around town.
Right.
So you're going to get some shoes that might be nice for running around town, but wouldn't be allowed in competition, and probably shouldn't be used for competition. So
sure.
Yeah, I'd say right now, especially in the road category, more cushion and use of really novel technologies like these carbon fiber plates are really driving most everything right now.
Cool. We should at this point also note that Nathan's going to be showing some shoes on his screen. So I am putting this episode, the video that we are recording, on YouTube. So if you want to see what we're talking about, you can go over to the YouTube channel, which is just Aaron Saft, and find this podcast and see exactly what we're talking about, so that if you're listening, you may lose on some of the things that we're going to touch on. So if you want to go over there and follow along, probably a better place to do it for this episode. But Nathan, you said a million things right there that we should talk about.
We should dig into them, right?
Right. So, I was in this coaching chat, and one of the questions posed to the group was, would you tell your athlete, let's just say they're a marathoner, okay, if they were to purchase a carbon plated shoe, would that be the end all be all solution for all of your training? So I had my response. And why don't you touch base on, how do you feel about, that idea, having that, that one shoe fits all solution?
Sure. Well, let's take it back even further, because there's nothing wrong with any particular direction on a shoe, but I really always, if you have the ability, I always like to think of shoes as a tool. And the best analogy I know is golf clubs. You can't go out to a golf course, just take a driver and hope to do well at that sport. If I play golf, I can probably get by with 3 clubs. I mean, I can do a putter, some type of wedge, and a driver, and I'm not going to affect my score that much. And that's how most people probably are. If you have one pair of shoes, you can go out and run and be happy, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you are able to have that stable of shoes, then you start to look at things like stack height of the shoe. How close are you to the ground? So stack height being the amount of material between the ground and your foot. Our general rule is that the less material you have between your foot and the ground, the more you're working out the muscles in your feet. The more you're working out the muscles in your feet, the stronger they're going to get, the better off you're going to be in the long term. Obviously, you can overwork muscles and that sort of thing, but as a general rule, the closer you are to barefoot, the stronger your feet are going to get when you're running, with obviously with some mileage exceptions in there.
Mhm.
The downside is the less cushion you have, the more it hurts, right? And so then you add a little bit of cushion. It's not uncommon to add 10, 20 millimeters of cushion under your feet and say, oh, this is totally normal. But you're still adding something. But within the normal realm of running, that might be totally adequate to add for the average runner. So finding something with 20 to 25 millimeters of cushion under your forefoot might be, you could probably find one shoe that's perfect in that regard, and just go out and run your 3 to 5 miles a day, a couple times a week, and be happy forever. If you start running further, or if you start racing, or if you start being more specific about how you're running, that's where all these tools come in. And what the market seems to be doing right now is offering a whole bunch of really oversized drivers, going back to that golf analogy. And those are amazing if you want to run a long ways, if you want to run really, really fast, if you want to, if you're shooting for that top percent. But what that cushion does is it takes away that proprioception, which is how your foot feels the ground, and it takes away your muscles' abilities to get stronger. So anything you put between your foot and the ground is going to take away that to some degree or another. Cushion does it. So if you're going to run with some of these maximally cushioned shoes, you're taking away your foot's ability to react to the ground. Same thing if you throw a carbon fiber plate in there, you're really taking away your foot's ability to feel what's going on underneath it. So while a carbon fiber plated shoe may be better for that, for a very long run, or for a very fast run, you probably want to mix something in to get more of that feel of the ground back, to activate the muscles.
Mhm.
And so I always like to, if you only have one shoe, go for something right in the middle, because it probably won't hurt you and it'll give you the protection you need. If you can have two, I almost avoid that middle shoe and go for something with almost no cushion or very little cushion, and then something with a lot of cushion. So that for me, early in the week, I'll go out and run in a more minimal shoe. I'll activate the muscles in my feet, my calves, my quads. I'll take small steps and really feel the ground underneath me. By the time I get to Friday, my legs are a little tired, or maybe I'm going on a long run on the weekend. Then I'm just going to throw cushion at it, because it allows me to do, it's a tool that allows me to do something that I wouldn't have been able to do had I just been barefoot or minimally shod.
Yeah.
So I hope that addresses the carbon fiber one. I'd be interested to hear your
Yeah, no,
response on
it's
that as well.
I tell my athletes, I said, you have a toolbox, right? Like you're not going to try to fix a pipe with a hammer. You have to have different tools in the toolbox, right? So and that's exactly right. I think the only piece that I would throw into the conversation is maybe a difference in the offset, the ramp of the shoe. When I went down into my my collection, I was looking through all my shoes and noticed I didn't have much variation in ramp, like especially in my road shoes. I was like, wow, I don't have many options. And I have a history of Achilles problems and calf problems. And I love zero drop. I love, my zero drop shoes, but at the same time, sometimes I need a little bit of relief. I need to let those tendons and muscles relax a little bit. And it's nice to just go for a run in like a slightly higher ramp shoe. It doesn't have to be anything ridiculous, but like I kind of have this range. My body, like, I feel comfortable in probably that 5 millimeter and under. If I go above that, I don't feel so comfortable. Like, it just doesn't feel good under my foot. Like I don't like my stance or how I'm running. It just feels off.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of to the wearer, of what range works for you, and it not zero drops not for everybody, and 12 millimeters is not for everybody. So that conversation, I think, is the only thing, or the only piece that I would throw in there, is that if you can vary your footwear, I think one piece of it to look at is to make sure there is a slight difference in the offset, just so you have that variation in what tendons and muscles are being used while you're running. As to the question I posed to you, yeah, and just like you were saying, I would not say that a super shoe is the end all be all for every, if we said marathon runner. I think that like you said, if you want to choose one shoe, it would probably be that kind of that daily like workhorse, right? That mid range cushioning shoe. And again, depending on who you are, what your history is, and that's a good conversation to kind of have if you have a history like I do. But yeah, so no no one shoe for all.
I'll throw
Um,
something else in there, Aaron.
Go
Is
ahead.
that daily workhorse shoe, that kind of middle of the road cushion shoe, regardless of drop on it, is probably pretty reasonably priced.
Yeah.
They're not the $250 shoes. They tend to be more in that $120 to $150 range, which seems to be the kind of middle ground right now. I know 150 sounds high. When we opened the store, we had $85 shoes, but
Right.
but just over time, and not just in the last year, but over time, kind of that $85 shoe 10 years ago is now a $110 to $120,
Right.
and so that workhorse shoe tends to fall in that maybe $140, $150, probably $140 category. That seems to be a really sweet spot. So you can get a great daily runner that you can take out and race in if you want to go race, that you can run a long way in if you want to run a long way, that you can do pretty much everything at a
Mhm.
reasonable price.
Totally. Totally.
And you mentioned the drop on the shoe. Couldn't agree with you more. I have yet to see a whole bunch of any science that says having a really high drop on a shoe is beneficial to folks. I think looking at you look at someone like Saucony, who looked at the science a decade ago and said, "Hey, we've got no reason to make a shoe over 8 millimeters." And so at the store here at URC, we break down shoes based on kind of a natural foot drop to it, which is for us 0 to 2 millimeter drop, and then we have kind of a low drop shoe, which is 3 to 5 millimeters, and then anything above 5 millimeters, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is going to be a high drop shoe for us.
Mhm.
And with very few exceptions, I don't think there's a whole lot of reason to go above that 8 millimeter drop, although people will certainly disagree with me in that area. That's just our approach on it.
Yeah. No, and it's I think this this conversation of ramp was interesting, especially when we talk about the rocker bottom of how Hoka started to produce the more rocker bottom when they where their meta rocker is. In other words, like at what point in your gait cycle or your foot cycle does the shoe toe off? I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Pearl Izumi and their history of what they did. Right, they had the dynamic ramp,
Sure.
whereas he the shoe designer, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he started shaving the front, until he felt he had that right, toe off, that toe spring, so it was, that flat. It wasn't, Hoka did it because they had so much cushioning, they had to help the foot kind of transition through. Whereas Pearl Izumi wanted to kind of create this, really smooth transition. Um, so go
just
ahead. And,
just to use a prop here,
yeah.
what we're talking about is this: when you have a really well cushioned shoe, maximally cushioned shoe, you're going to have so much cushion that you can't get any power off of your toe when you push off, because that cushion would just absorb it all when you try to push off. So you'd waste all kinds of energy. What we've got here is what we're calling a ramp, where it starts in this Hoka Bondi. It starts about here and it rolls forward so that there's less cushion right on the toes. And for those of you listening to the podcast, I'm right at the front of the shoe. Basically, it goes from under your metatarsals, so
The ball of your foot.
the joint, the ball of your foot, and it quickly goes to a less cushioned area in front of your toes, and that's that ramp. It's a roll that you're going to feel, and that aside from the cushion, that's something that Hoka really brought to the game.
Right.
But to your point, Pearl Izumi did a fantastic job of that and other things when they were making shoes.
Yeah.
They would just carve away at it until it was a comfortable
Right.
ride for them, and
Yeah.
they did an exceptional job of it.
Absolutely. It was kind of, the one of the first shoes that I saw that like they actually thought out, how does this ride feel? Right? Like how does
Right.
this, transition? Like if you're a heel striker, how does it transition from the heel to the midfoot to the toe off, right? Or even midfoot to toe off? Like they want that to be the smoothest possible. I'm my daughter has one of my old shirts. It says smoothidity. That's the Pearl Izumi term, smoothidity. How smooth is it? It was great. But transitioning from this point, right? Like we talked about how thick a Hoka can be. And the only way that we can make a shoe with this much material underfoot move is to create this rocker effect. It became the same thing that we talk about with the super shoes, but the component that happened with the super shoes is this new foam needed some kind of rigidity, right? That some kind of structure. So do you want to talk about that, where that brought us?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a perfect way to describe what happened with this foam. Um, there is one foam on the market right now, this PIBA foam that most people are licensing. It's like if we were to talk about trail shoes, and we will later, talking about the different types of tread rubber. And we'll hit on that later with different types of Vibram and in-house ones. But basically, this PIBA is kind of considered the gold standard right now. It's what Nike put in. And so what Nike did when they came out with their carbon plated shoe is they had this PIBA, but it was incredibly unstable because it was so light and it bounced so much. So they inserted this carbon fiber plate in to give it some structural rigidity. The challenge that they had on the first version, anyways, was that they then tapered that carbon off in the heel. And some of these first super shoes were incredibly unstable in the heel. So folks that had a longer stride, a stride where their heel landed in front of their center of gravity, or where they touched down on their heel before they touched down on their midfoot and forefoot, had a very my understanding is there were some injuries directly attributed to that particular thing, which is another reason why you don't use a super shoe in daily training. The people that they were testing it on tended to land on their forefoot and didn't need it in the back. So to get weight out, I would assume, Nike made it taper off towards the back, so they weren't getting that stable landing in the heel of their shoes. Other folks did that as well. We'll talk about that with the Saucony that we've got in a second. But yeah, so the carbon fiber plate creates some of that stability, I guess, that went away when they added all that cushion. So the way that I look at that a lot is, think about when you were little and you had a pencil with a big eraser on top. When you first start erasing with that thing, that eraser is all over the place. It's not a square anymore. It rubs off really quickly. That's what happens with a lot of cushion when there's no structural integrity on it. As you get lower, as you erase and erase, if you remember, the last millimeter of that eraser in grade school would last you months, whereas the first inch would be gone almost immediately. So just think about your heel like that. You want, wherever you land in a shoe, you want your feet to be able to figure out what's going on. And so that's where these carbon fiber plates come in, add a little bit more consistency. They're generally right in the middle of the midsole, which is what we generally think of as cushion. They're in the middle somewhere, providing a spot that tightens up the shoe a little bit.
Right. Yep. So, and the interesting thing I think about these carbon plated shoes, and this is part of the trend that we're seeing today, as you were saying, is that they're trying to throw this Pebax foam into everything they can. So can you talk about the different levels that they've created? Like, Saucony has the Endorphin line, for example. And Ultra now has, its carbon
Sure.
versus, lower, I don't want to say lower end,
Yeah.
but so why don't you touch on that?
Let's jump into that a little bit with like the Saucony line, where
Sure.
Saucony's got this is the Endorphin Pro. So basically, Saucony has three shoes in their Endorphin line. There's an Endorphin Pro, which is a carbon fiber plated shoe with a ton of cushion. It's designed to be as light as possible, and for those that can see this online, it has a huge ramp on the front. So a lot of cushion in back, huge ramp on the front, and it uses what they call Power Run PB. I believe when they first pitched this to us, the PB stood for personal best. Pretty confident it stands for Pebax, right? So they have Power Foam PB, which is that material which they have licensed or bought from PIBA. Same thing when you go down to the Endorphin Speed, they're still using that PIBA material, the Power Run PB, but they've taken out the carbon fiber plate. They've in the Speed version, they've inserted a TPU plate, a plastic plate in there to give it some more of that rigidity. And the really interesting thing on the Endorphin Speed is this was one of those shoes that on the first go round was actually a little bit unstable on the heel. And so if you were a walker wearing this shoe, I know that seems odd to buy a high performance shoe and walk in it, but it's really comfortable. If you were a walker in it, landing with your foot in front of your body, you'd really kind of just go all over the place on that heel. You'd go from left to right. So what Saucony did with their third version of the shoe is they've really expanded out the heel to give you a more consistent, stable landing on the speed, in addition to actually bringing up on the side of it, the carbon fiber plate and the endorphin speed actually comes through and creates some little wings on the side that actually give you again a more stable feeling. So the third shoe in that lineup, called the Saucony Endorphin Shift, does not use Power Run PB. It uses Power Run. In this case, that's not the P-backs. It's basically a line extension, and you'll see that a lot in running shoes where they take something that's popular and their highest performance product, and they just step it down. And the way that you step it down, take away price, take away performance, is to take out some materials. So in that case, the Endorphin Shift is a completely different shoe than the Endorphin Speed and the Endorphin Pro. And this year, with their upgrades on the Endorphin Pro, they've actually made them all three very differentiated. So more than ever in 2013, the Endorphin Pro 3 is an exceptionally lightweight, exceptionally cushioned shoe with that carbon fiber plate in it. It's a shoe that I would say is only going to be used on race day, or I guess on a day when you're doing just complete speed workouts, you know, doing your quarter mile repeats or 100-yard repeats even. And then you want something that you can go out and be comfortable in for the rest of the run when you're doing your cool downs and your in between kind of 10-minute miles or whatever your in between section in that speed work is. You can certainly wear the Pro for that. But for me, for our recommendations in the store, we're saying get the Pro to go really, really fast and keep it that way. And so then on race day, not only are you wearing a shoe that's exceptionally fast, but you're wearing a shoe that you feel faster in because you're not wearing it every single day.
Right.
If you want a shoe that you can both race in and use as a training shoe, and you're going to have one shoe, we're always going to point people towards that Endorphin Speed, which is still a very fast, very comfortable, very fun shoe, but it isn't right on the bleeding edge of speed. And so that's kind of the difference, in feel for those two shoes.
Yeah. Can we, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh no, I was going to say now when you look at that and you go to someone like Ultra,
right?
That's where they're going to do. Yeah, they're going to do the same thing. Where they have a shoe now, the Vanish Carbon, which is a carbon plated shoe that they've put in. Now their carbon plate, because Ultra is still has an approach with a wider toe box, zero drop, and they're trying to maintain a little bit of that natural approach. Their carbon fiber plate does not go from heel to toe. It's going to go for only a portion of the shoe. So let's say the first half. So when you land, you're going to on your forefoot, you're going to land and pop off of that. But if you're landing on your heel, you're just going to get cushion on it. Which then begs the question: if you're landing on your heel, do you need to be paying $225 for a carbon fiber plated shoe? So the thing with Ultra is that it's because it's zero drop, it feels fantastically fast when you're running on it. Because one of the things that the drop, that ramp of the shoe does, is it when you have more heel on a shoe, it actually makes it a little bit harder to come through your gait cycle and land on your forefoot. So you get a zero drop shoe that doesn't have a heel on it and has a carbon fiber plate, and there's nothing to get in your way, nothing to get caught, and you always are landing on your forefoot in kind of a sprint manner. So it's one of these shoes that lets you have your fastest run and lets you do it in exceptionally, it feels like your turnover is much higher in the Ultra than in any other shoe that I've run in. Now Ultra has not put in the PIBA. They're using their own internal rubber on this. It's a very bouncy shoe. Frankly, if you were to hold the shoe, it would almost feel it almost looks and feels like those packing peanuts that come in your, when you get a box with something really fragile in it. It's almost translucent, and you can just tell that it's going to bounce back. So it's really interesting.
Almost like a TPU.
It is, but it doesn't have those beads that you'd expect from the
Sure.
TPU
Mhm.
from the old Adidas Boosts.
Right.
It's a single, at least in appearance wise, it's a single one. I haven't cut this shoe open yet, but we do that sometimes when it's slow at the store. We'll cut them open. But this one appears to be a solid foam bottom, not something that's pushed together like those old not old
Gotcha.
TPU ones, but
Okay.
yeah.
They haven't
So
really said what exactly is their proprietary blend, have they?
they haven't. They have a name for it. It's Ego Pro.
Okay.
And they've been using their Ego material in shoes since they introduced it, I believe, on the Escalante, probably 3 or 4 years ago,
Right.
and maybe a little longer. But this is their Ego Pro, so it's definitely one of these next generation materials. It is very light. It has fantastic bounce on it, but
Cool.
it's not the Pua,
Right on.
to
And
the
then
best of my knowledge.
and then they taper it down. The next version below that would be
So the next version below that is the Vanish Tempo, and it has a similar look and feel to it. It does not have the plate, um, and so it still has that Ego Pro foam,
okay.
but it doesn't have the plate in it, and so that takes out. In Ultra's case, something really interesting that I missed on that is Ultra uses a carbon fiber plate from a company called Carbitex. And the reason I point out the actual brand name on this, which I always try not to do, just like I was trying not to call something Ego Plus or Ego Pro. Carbitex is a carbon fiber plate that they make to bend in one direction.
Hmm.
And so when you land in the Ultra, it actually does flex when you land and then pops back. Whereas a carbon fiber plate is designed to not flex at all. So when you get to the end of your stride, that flex it's return the energy. It actually goes and becomes just kind of a normal shoe, which is really interesting.
That is interesting.
They don't have that in the Tempo.
Okay.
The other two differences, though, in trying to get some lightweight out of the Vanish Carbon, they have a very, very thin upper, and that's been one of our challenges with the Vanish Carbon is depending on your heel shape, that upper may not fit you as well. It's hard to describe, but it's a very thin one, and then it has some bolsters inside the heel that lock your heel in.
Like the
But if
Mont
your
Blanc?
heel exactly like the Mont Blanc, yeah, we'll definitely touch on that when we get to trail shoes as
Cool.
well. So if something like the Mont Blanc holds your foot in, the Vanish Carbon will. When you go down to the Vanish Tempo, you tend to have a more traditional padded collar, the part that goes around your ankle, and it becomes it really locks you in there as well. So you kind of get the same feel, maybe not that super spring that you'd get out of the Vanish Carbon, and definitely a little more weight with the Tempo.
Yeah.
But both are solid shoes. So
Cool.
interesting, and they both with Ultra, you're always going to get that nice foot shaped toe box. A little bit less in these two shoes. The big difference in Ultra over the last couple of years is they used to have kind of an athletic foot shaped toe box and a traditional foot shaped toe box.
Right.
And the difference between that was the athletic one had a wider toe box with a narrow heel, and the traditional one had a wider toe box with a wider heel. They've now introduced kind of a middle one for that. It's visually more appealing, I'd say. It doesn't have that big shoe look that
Right.
Ultras have had in the past, but it also, if you do have a wide foot where you might have been able to fit into an Ultra in the past, just try these shoes on. They fit a lot like the Ultra Rivera, which is the first one to use that kind of middle foot shape.
Because they term the narrowest the slim, right? The slim fit. And then
so that's the athletic one that I talk about. That's the superior that's going to have that narrow heel. Yep.
Even though the Mont Blanc has that, that padded heel like you were talking about in the Carbon. And then you have the mid, and then I think it's standard for their widest. Is that right?
I think they're calling it standard, and that would be like their Lone Peak, the Lone Peak and the Olympus. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. In that same vein, have you got to play with the Outroad?
I have not played with the Outroad. We looked at that segment, and we felt like that segment was kind of met between the Timp and a product from another company, Topo, called the Pursuit.
Okay.
And so in trying not to duplicate, one of the things we try and do here at Ultra Running Company is when you walk in, you know that we would run in every shoe there. And we
Sure.
always try and find the one that would be, kind of our flagship for that. And the Pursuit fit more into a mixed use type category. And so it not maybe if you have one shoe in your quiver and you're going to do some road and some trail, that Pursuit would fit in there. But that also kind of describes the Timp, and it kind of describes the Pursuit, although both of them are a tiny bit more aggressive. So we tended to stick with those two shoes
Yeah.
and go from there. The new Timp, by the way, is a dramatic difference from Timps in the past, both stylistically and functionally. Let me see. Let's see. They're all orange. Every shoe is orange. That's the other thing. Yeah, the Timp just has. They've added some drainage ports, which I'm always trying to figure out whether that's helpful or not here in the Southeast. Generally speaking, if water can get out of something, it can get into something.
True.
And so, it's a nice. There've been a couple shoes over time that have had these drainage ports. A lot of time for triathletes on the road. This is the first trail shoe I've seen with that. So basically, if your shoe does get wet and you've got a lot of water inside of it, it'll shoot it out the sides in kind of a unique effect there. Cool. But the Timp's always been known for having a very shallow toe box.
Yeah.
And that is somewhat solved with the most recent Timp. So,
okay.
And that's the Timp 4.
Yeah. The Outroad, I've got to play with it for quite a few runs now. And I live on a dirt road. And then, I can go run road and then I can hit the forest and run around, but, it is on that slim last. So it is kind of on the narrower last. It was kind of one of those thoughts like, oh man, this would be probably, something I could look at for like, Western states.
Sure.
But, there's no gator attachment, which, I love on Altra's shoes is they have that, built-in gator attachment. So, I got to glue something on. And it does hold water. What you were just talking about with the Timp. When I went through water crossing, which we all know you got to cross the Rucky Chucky in Western states, that if your foot gets wet, it's going to feel heavy for a bit. Like it did not.
Sure.
It didn't release the water very well. So, but otherwise running on it feels great. Like road or trail, like it feels great. But once it gets wet, it gets pretty heavy. So. But that's just
perfect. By the way, this is that Topo Pursuit that I mentioned, and this is a new product completely for Topo.
Okay,
and it's a zero drop shoe, which one of the benefits of Topo is that the designer, the guy that started it, Tony Post, tends to design his shoes with specific uses in mind. So he has shoes with a 5 millimeter drop. He has shoes with a 3 millimeter, shoes that are zero, depending on what he thinks they're going to be used for. And so, this Pursuit is a nice addition, I think, in the zero drop. Still, uses a nice Vibram outsole and that sort of thing. But yeah, so it's very comparable in my mind. Depending on your foot shape and your particular feel, very comparable to that Timp.
Fair enough.
So, we did get off of the road there as I was trying to, I was kind of sizing there, but
transition shoe, but yeah, if we were to look, you talked a little bit about it when you were holding up the Sauconys. What we notice a lot of times, often, and you and I saw this, when we went and saw the 10-9 by Hoka, was that heel flare. I mean, that monster heel. If folks can remember, I don't have my 10-9 to show it, but it had that monster heel off the back.
Yes.
And they did it with like what was the Clifton Edge, right? And so they still have that
bit with the mock.
Yeah, and we start to see that in some of the New Balance shoes now too. We're getting. Let's talk about that a little bit. Can we talk about some of what are some of the the ideas behind putting that much heel behind the foot?
Sure. So a lot to this one. Basically, I had a great conversation with the designers from Hoka that started Hoka this summer, and I guess this fall. And what they've found, while everyone else is trying to catch up with them and add more and more cushion, they feel like there's some diminishing returns with that. They feel like you can't get a whole lot more benefit by adding a whole lot more cushion. What they've found is you can get a whole lot more benefit by adding more surface area. And so what they're trying to do is extend the surface area of a shoe. And there's only so many places that you can do that. The 10-9 was a really extreme example. If you remember, it actually extended it off of the toe and the heel.
Mm-hmm.
And it went out. I mean, aren't you like a size 10, 10 and a half?
11, yeah.
11.
Yeah.
So I'm a 13, and my 13s, the day we first saw the 10-9s, my size 13 regular shoes were shorter than your 11 10-9 shoes. And that was just them trying to give you more surface area on the bottom. So they made it wider, they made it longer. Hoka has specifically kept that, not as extreme as a 10-9. That was more of what they called, even when they introduced it, they called that kind of a real world concept car. You know, that
Yeah.
they said we may or may not sell any of these, but this is the direction that we're going.
Right.
And directionally, they've stuck with that, and they've added on these what they call an extended crash pad. So I'm going to be super clear on this. Our perspective on that is that it looks really, really fast. It's hard to go from a shoe that has that extended crash pad. I know Nike has some. I think you just mentioned, did you say New Balance?
New Balance, yeah.
New
Yeah, you
Balance has some.
start to see that.
Hoka has them in there. I think the Mach 5 is an exceptional shoe. It has an extended crash pad. But bottom line, you shouldn't be hitting the ground with your heel there anyway. Um, unless you're really extending, going downhill on an exceptionally steep terrain that just makes it impractical. And I'm not making a judgment here on whether heel striking is better than midfoot striking is better than forefoot striking, but absolutely you should not be landing so far in front of your body that you need a built-up crash pad off the back of your foot. What we find specifically with the Hokas that I've run in where I experience that, these extended crash pads on the shoes right now don't get in the way. They don't cause any issues. So if you're running efficiently and you're landing under your center of gravity, you're not going to be hurt by them. And if you are taking too long a stride, there may be some benefit to it. But bottom line, it's really hard when you're running on a daily basis and you put on a pair of these shoes in a running store of the Mach 5s, or really most of the shoes right now that are coming out, and they have that extended heel. And then you put on a normal pair of shoes and you just look at them. The extended heel ones just look faster, man. So I don't think there's a downside to it, but I'm not personally super excited about the benefits of having an additional crash pad coming off the back.
Sure.
Given it, you're far more into the mechanics than I am, and well read on that. I don't know if you have an opinion in that area, but
yeah, I mean, I sometimes worry that, like, depending on the design, it can create more foot slap. So you're going to use a lot more of the shin muscles. So those that are a little bit more prone to having shin splints or problems, in the anterior, that's sometimes I worry about, because if you've got this edge back out here, and like you talked about, if you're heel striking, that can cause the foot to kind of either slam faster, depending on how it's built, right? Or it can slow it down. It's just, how did the company do it, right? How did they bevel that? So that's my only concern is, for certain runners, not everybody, not everybody's going to have
sure.
that problem, and it's going to work different with other people. And it's unfortunately trial and error. That's the only thing I ever worry about.
Right.
But yeah, no, looking at these shoes, they, like the Nikes, they've got that sharp point off the back on their super shoes. And, it looks fast.
It looks quick, man. And by the way, though, you can take a shoe like that, like this Mach 5, and have that technology, which again, in my opinion, certainly doesn't hurt anything.
Right.
Looks fantastic. And there may be a benefit. I'll trust their designers on the fact that however they went through it, that they had a benefit. But you can also take a shoe like that and look at some of the amazing things they're doing with rubber compounds, even without P-backs. And this Mach 5, while it looks exactly like the Mach 4, it has two types of rubber on it. For those of you watching, the top layer is very, very soft. So the part right underneath your feet is very, very soft and almost pillowy, kind of that traditional Hoka feel. And then there's a second part, the part that's between the ground and that first level, that's very, very springy. And so you get a shoe that feels like it has more cushion than it has,
Mm.
and allows you to land regardless, again, regardless of whether you're landing on your heel or your forefoot or somewhere in between. You land, you get a little bit of that sink in, and then you get that pop right back off. That makes it very, very versatile. It's a fast, short distance shoe. It's also a very comfortable long distance shoe.
Mhm.
So there are some really amazing technological differences that you can see in a shoe that may not be as apparent as the extended heel, but in my opinion have more of an impact on how people run on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So on this Mach 5, we think this is probably the best. This is a current shoe, just came out. We think it's the best Mach that's ever been out there. It's very, very comfortable. It's not like an Ultra where it has a foot shaped toe box, but it certainly has a more accommodating toe box. It
Mhm.
seems to fit folks that perhaps these wouldn't have fit in the past. We go back to one of those, what do you do as an everyday shoe? I would say this Mach 5 is at the upper end of cushioning on a all around shoe that would be a good choice in there.
Nice.
It still has a decent amount of cushion, but it gives you that little bit of feel for the ground, consistent landing, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
this is a really interesting one to point out for this season. That while it looks just like the Mach 4, feels very different if you're really putting them next to each other.
Absolutely. Um, we've touched a lot about the foams, and the carbon plates and the different materials that they're using to help the underfoot feel. I think we'd also be remiss if we didn't talk about the uppers, because the uppers have a lot to do with fit, of the shoe and how they feel on the foot. What are you seeing there? And well, I guess please start by defining, what's the upper?
Exactly. I'm going to use the for folks watching. I'm going to use the endorphin speed here because it's a pretty good example of probably the most popular type of material right now. What I guess you'd call a mono mesh, a single piece upper, which means very simply that there are no seams in shoes right now. In your better specialty running shoes, you shouldn't have many seams, if any, on the top of that shoe, especially in your toe box area. And this is something I think Pearl Zumi was the first one I saw doing this, going back to those guys, because I think Aaron and I are in a similar boat there, saying they did a lot of things right before they abruptly stopped making shoes.
Right.
But they basically it's one piece. It doesn't have a whole lot of these overlays, which is that material that stretches basically from the sole or from the midsole of the shoe up to the top to provide support. Because of what they can do with these meshes now, they can put structural differences within the mesh itself. And so what you get is a shoe that kind of adapts to your foot. If you pull the laces tighter in certain areas, the shoe will get tighter there. It'll hold you in. It's pretty water indifferent in that if it gets wet, it's not going to stretch out. If it's dry, it's still going to feel great. It's not going to braze you. And that's really what I look for in an upper. For us, the one thing you want to look for when you're trying on a shoe is you want it to be very snug around your heel and snug over your instep. Um, Beyond that, the whole front of the shoe is kind of just to keep dirt out. Um, there's not a whole lot of reason. What you don't want is a shoe that's super tight against your toes. This is a general item, and it's why some people wear these rounded shoes. Some people can go with more pointy shoes. But having that nice snug feel around your heel and over your instep, that's where you get control of a shoe. And the front just gives you kind of added safety and make sure that you're not stubbing your toes, that you're not getting dirt in there, that sort of thing. So the best shoes right now are using. They kind of go back and forth. Hoka is using something called a jacquard mesh. I think when you throw in something like jacquard, it makes it sound more exotic. It just means that it has some more texture to it, as far as I can tell.
Right.
And they'll go back and forth. Now, if you go to these really high end shoes, and again, I'm going to use the Endorphin, but in this case, the Pro. If you're going for super lightweight, every single thing on this shoe is carved out. You can see through the mesh on the side. So you better wear socks that coordinate with your shoes. They've literally carved pieces out of the tongue in order to make that lighter, and they do it in such a way that it's not going to abrade your foot. Tongues seem to be a very difficult thing for shoe manufacturers to figure out. You may have someone go with a very flat tongue on one version of a shoe and then move over to a padded tongue on another. that really comes down to personal preference. We will have people complain all day at the store about a flat tongue that abrases their ankle in such a way that it cuts into it or something like that. The same shoe will be absolutely wildly comfortable on other folks. So tongues are one of these personal preferences. There are some that I think are better all around than others, but it's just something that you've got to see how it does on your foot in order to get that tongue right.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, touched on a lot. Is there anything else that we should touch on the road side of things?
Yeah, I think on the roadside, that pretty much covers it. One other shoe that I'd point out that's out there, and for folks watching, this is probably back to that 10-9 type design. You've got some use of carbon fiber in shoes that are not meant to go fast. And you're seeing it more and more to provide stability and consistency. And I just bring this up because you've got something, we talked about line extensions with the Saucony Endorphin.
Right.
Same thing with someone like Hoka, who's come out with in the past the Clifton Edge, which the Clifton is one of their franchise shoes. It does a great job. It's incredibly consistent over time. But they then came out with the Clifton Edge, which honestly was not a Clifton. It was just a shoe that they used the Clifton name on.
Right.
So what we've got here is Hoka has another franchise, the Bondi, which I think everyone that knows Hoka knows the Bondis. It's their maximally cushioned. It's a fantastically consistent shoe. It's kind of the reference point for well-cushioned shoes. They have a new Bondi out, the Bondi 8, but they also have a shoe called the Bondi X, which is even more cushioned and inserts a carbon fiber plate in it. What I always like to point out with this is if you're going for speed, the Bondi X is not the shoe for you. It's not a lightweight racing shoe. It could be a long distance racing shoe because it has more cushion. And as we talked about before, bringing it back, it has a carbon fiber plate in it that provides the consistency with that huge amount of cushion. So if you wanted a best use case for a shoe like the Bondi X, in my opinion, something like the Yeti 100 or here in North Carolina, the Umstead 100, basically road courses that have a tiny bit of trail in them, but that are very flat and are very long. Something like this Bondi X, that may be a perfect use case for this shoe for folks that are not, by the way, trying to finish those. I think someone finished the Yeti this year in 13, 14 hours. They're probably not wearing this shoe either. They're wearing an exceptionally light shoe, but for the humans out here, for the rest of us, something like that takes away some of the discomfort that you feel over 100 miles and uses technology in a way that is useful to the actual athlete.
Right. So, no, great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Not at all.
So if we transition over to trail, I think I want to start this conversation or this portion of the conversation. I don't know if you saw Brian Metzler's article at all. Did you see that?
I did. Yep.
Yeah. If to give a synopsis, he did a great article, and I'll try to put that article in the show notes because he brought up the topic of are carbon plates relevant to the trail market, right? Because we're seeing it, and that's what we're going to talk about is what we're seeing. But he brought up some really good points, and with those in mind, and we can kind of expound on those as this conversation goes through. But let's talk about what's on the market, what's coming to market. What are you seeing in as the fall rolls out here? We're going to see some new shoes coming out, but and then as we have this conversation about what's rolling out, we'll talk about Brian's points and are they relevant to what's coming out?
For sure. Yeah, and I want to start first with actually going back to a past season shoe. And the first shoe that came out with the carbon fiber plate in it was the North Face Flight Vective. And I think at the time it was met with a ton of anticipation. People were really excited about it. A lot of people got that shoe right off the bat, as well as their derivative shoes down below that, the Vective Infinite and the Vective Endurus. And then over time, I think over the last year or so, I think it got outside gear of the year and people were wildly excited about the shoe. Over the last year, I think it's actually gotten a lot of pushback because I think a couple of their athletes have been pretty vocal about the fact that they were using that shoe for the same technical trails that they'd used in the past. And I can't remember if Brian mentioned this, but a couple of the athletes for North Face are no longer running with North Face and are relatively open about the fact that they think that was not the best shoe for them physically for the period they were training in. I think Hillary Allen, while she doesn't say North Face, has been really she's signed with Brooks now, I believe,
Correct.
and it's been pretty vocal about that extending some of her issues. I think both of those are unfair. The Flight Vective was a fantastic trail running shoe with a carbon fiber plate that tried to bring road technology to the trail and did a nice job for races on appropriate surfaces. And so the surfaces that I think of for that are something like for the Californians, looking at the North Face 50 or Miwok or something in the Marin
American River.
headlands. Yeah, I mean, this is a shoe that has the traction that you want for trails, that has the durability that you need for trails, yet brings some of that technology in on a relatively flat surface.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you're looking at it as a tool, not everybody needs a sand wedge in their golf bag. I personally can't hit out of a sand trap, regardless of what type of club I have. But for folks doing those speedy trail runs, I think it was a pretty good option. So I think it's always important to, when we talk about these shoes, to talk about what you're using them for. And one of the reasons trail is so difficult to come up with index shoes that are just better than anything else. We can do that on the road. We can point out 5 or 6 shoes on the road that are just better than other shoes for racing. But we can't really do that on a trail because the surface is so different. And so when we look at the carbon fiber plate, what I see now is some really exciting ways that manufacturers are trying to address the shortcomings of the carbon fiber. And the shortcoming of that is that something that allows you to spring forward faster also takes away your foot's ability to feel the nuance of the ground and adjust. And that's one of the most important things you can do in trail running. So the best 2 technologies, and I've got 2 examples of that. Hoka's got a shoe, the Tecton X. And what they have in this is, you can't see it because it's inside the shoe, but basically their carbon fiber plate is 2 plates coming down the side with a little bit of overlap in the middle. I believe it looks kind of like an H if you were to look at it, but an H that's been not cut in the middle. That's simplistic. But basically what it allows the 2 pieces to do, and that's why they call it the Tecton, move like Tecton plates independently. And so what they've done is taken something that before would have only shifted from all the way to the left, all the way to the right with that carbon fiber plate. Now it can shift in the middle as well. So it gives you a little bit more control. When you look at what I think are the best reviews of this shoe, they say this is a fantastic trail shoe. It's capable. It's got, I told you we'd come back to tread rubber. It's got Vibram Mega Grip on the bottom, which I think is a reference rubber.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, absolutely. So light base just means that it's a thinner version of Mega Grip.
Yep.
It's the underneath stuff. It's not the actual lugs. But then that Mega Grip is the actual compound of rubber. It wears well. As it gets wet, it sticks pretty well. And so it's a good all-around rubber. So it has that. But what this shoe probably isn't good for is your most technical trails. And again, going around the country, maybe not your best shoe for the Pennsylvania hills, right? Maybe not your best shoe. I actually had a little bit of an argument about this with somebody online, which you should never, ever do. Maybe not your best shoe for the Alps, right? Maybe not hard rock, something like that, because it doesn't flex enough for those areas. Yep. And this particular shoe only has 4 millimeter lugs on it. So the lugs on the bottom are not the deepest out there. Yep. So all those things combined, and I think they've done that on purpose. They know that they're not quite where they need to be to have a carbon fiber plate that's ready to take on the toughest, rockiest trails. Right. So they designed a shoe that had carbon fiber plates that adjusted, but should be used on somewhat more buff trails.
I think the other piece of this that I think we'd be really remiss not to talk about is the foam that goes in it, because part of what we're paying for in super shoes is that P-backs, right? That energy return that's going to give us efficiency, where this shoe has the carbon plates, but if I'm not mistaken, it doesn't have the P-backs. Is that correct?
That's correct. To date, there's no Hoka shoe with P-backs in it.
Right. So, like that begs the question, right? Like, what are we paying? What's the advantage here, right? Like, yeah, it has carbon plated. Is that really going to give us a viable benefit, to running the trails?
Sure. And what it might do is give you a little bit more spring as you go. Um, the the cost, I always struggle with cost on shoes because some folks that I've worked with have claimed that it has to do with the mileage of the shoe. Others have say it has to do with the materials. Um, it probably has more to do with what they can charge for it, Aaron. It's not necessarily tied to the cost of goods, right?
Mhm.
And I don't believe that it should be. You're paying for the best shoe you can get across a wide variety of attributes, some of which are technology, some of which are design, and so there are other attributes in addition to the carbon fiber plate on something like the Tecton. The Tecton also uses that same foam approach that I was talking about with the mock
Mhm.
to make it feel like a more cushioned shoe, although it's closer to the ground than it actually has. And I'm going out on a limb here because I didn't measure them right before I came in, but it has about the same cushion as the Speed Goat,
Mm.
but it feels significantly different than the Speed Goat. And so when
Nice.
you compare those two things, the other one is the Mafate 4 that they just came out with. Again, pretty close to the same cushion as a Speed Goat, but it feels very different. So what Hoka is
Yes.
doing is taking all their technologies, and maybe they're charging us a few bucks just because they know how to mix those things together, and do it in a way that makes the shoe comfortable. But what you're getting, generally speaking, is the more expensive shoes are probably worth a little bit more than the less expensive shoes,
Yeah,
whether it's the
well,
material, the technology, the way
design,
that they put
right.
them together.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
it's
I'd go so far as to say one of the reasons I'd pay more for something like the Tecton is not the technology so much as how that technology is put together, and then the feel of the shoe
feel.
that they've put it in. One of the things about the Tecton is it laces almost all the way down to the toe, the end of the
Yes.
toes.
Right.
Some people love that, some people hate it. For me, it gives me a lot more variable for my toes. I'm going to run 100 miles in a shoe like this.
Mhm.
And at the beginning, I may want it to be snugger throughout my whole foot. At the end, I may want to loosen it around my ankle, around my toes. And this gives me the ability to do that.
Yes.
There are other technologies that do that as well. We'll definitely hit on that in a second with a
Mhm.
shoe I know you want to talk about. But I think that, and then the toe box in the and the shape of the Tecton is very different from any other Hoka that I've worn. So it is more
Yes.
accommodating there as well. So
Right.
it makes it a very interesting shoe, if
It
not
does.
because of the P-backs. Now, if you want to talk about P-backs in a trail shoe, I'll bring up a shoe that I think is wildly underreported right now,
Sure.
which is the Saucony Endorphin Edge. Um, this is a lot of shoe. You can tell looking at it if you can see online, but the Endorphin Edge has about as much cushion as any shoe out there, and it's P-backs, and it has a carbon fiber plate, and so you put all those things together, and what you're in addition to the fact that it has a very aggressive outsole, and you're getting a shoe that's really unlike any other trail shoe on the market. I think it's up to the wearer to decide if being different is better. But what I find in a shoe like this, when you take that P-backs and you take the carbon fiber plate, and go run on it on a trail, it feels incredibly fast, incredibly fast. Now, this is a shoe that you would run over things as opposed to a pair of zeros where you run with the trail. This is a shoe where you run over the trail. Um, and then the challenge is you are up pretty high in a shoe like the Endorphin Edge. And if you're on really technical trails, which the tread would have you believe it's capable of, if you're on really technical trails, you do have to be very conscious of how you're hitting the ground in order to make sure that you're not, you know,
Turning
you're
an
not
ankle.
turning an ankle, getting yourself off balance, something along those lines. So
Right.
one of the nice things about the Endorphin Edge, and it's only one of only three shoes that I know of on the market right now that have this, is it again uses the Carbitex plate. It's a full tex plate that bends in one direction and not the other. So it gives it a very usable feel. Saucony hasn't been known for their super high end trail running shoes. In fact, their Endorphin Trail was kind of DOA. It came out, people wore it a little bit, and then they had some quality control issues with it. That doesn't affect the fact that it was a unique shoe. This is, I think, that shoe done well.
Mm.
And so it when you first put it on, the upper feels a little bit sloppy, but much like the Kinvara, the lacing system to basically lock in it with a piece that goes all the way down to the midsole and really locks in your midfoot.
Nice.
And so I find in this Endorphin Edge, even though when I first put it on, I think, oh my gosh, this is not going to hold my foot on technical terrain. It does a relatively good job of that. So
Right.
I don't hear much about that shoe, and I want to make sure we brought it up
Yeah,
because
no, please. Yeah. That's,
it's a quality, I
yeah.
think a quality entry and maybe a shoe of choice for some folks.
Sure. And this was kind of, I think, one of, we can interject, one of Brian Metzler's points was that, as we spoke about earlier, that, the plate being in the shoe and not being a split like the Tecton, having that solid carbon plate is, like you said, you really have to be careful with your foot placement, because if the foot goes over, it's going to go over. Like there's no pulling it back, because how rigid that, that plate's going to make it be. And that was one of his big things is like, do you really want something like know your trails? In other words, like, do you want something that's going to be just for, doing dirt roads? Like this is probably fine, right? If you're just going to be out on gravel roads. But if you're, like you said, in something like, the Pennsylvania trails where it's super rocky, rooty, like, is that really the shoe that you're going to want on your foot? Like, is that?
Yeah, I mean, you may want to on those Pennsylvania trails. Some of them I've run outside of Penn State,
Mhm.
and that's just straight up
Yeah.
and rocks the whole way. You may give up on all of the technology just to get a pair of shoes that has enough tread and grip to give you the confidence you need to go up there, and
Right.
that's perfectly acceptable, right?
Totally.
That
Yeah.
makes total sense to me.
Yeah. No,
You'd
absolutely.
slide down most of those trails on your butt with a shoe with only 2 millimeters of cushion on it,
Yep.
of tread on it. So
Yeah.
um, a side note on Metzler, I think he's especially he was an early adopter with the Nike 4% shoe.
Mhm.
He wrote the Shoe
Kicksology.
Geeks, or Kicksology, and he writes in that book also about using that shoe, and he came out of that really badly because his stride was not super matched up with the 4% shoe, with some of that stability in the back. So I think he's really pays a lot of attention to this, and I think that's a good thing,
Yes. Yes.
and across both road and trail. So
Yep.
I don't think that's unique to trail. Trail just offers some different situations
Yeah, no,
to
well, and
that.
to the same thing, like you could be running Tussie up in Pennsylvania, and that's a perfectly fine, shoe for a race like Tussie. I mean, you could probably even pull off a road carbon
Yeah.
plated shoe,
Yep.
for 50 miles. So it really just depends on you and knowing what your course is and where you train, what you're going to use, and that's part of the conversation I had for Bigfoot, right? Like I was trying to find what was going to be protective enough and comfortable enough for me to go over, the stuff that was in and around Mount St. Helens. And, again, it's the same thing at Western States. Like I can't use this. I don't want to use the same shoe that, that I'd use for Bigfoot. So it's finding the right shoe that's going to do the job for you. And the Tecton might be a good option, a viable option for Western States. I have the Tecton, and it may not be for the whole course, but for a certain portion, right?
Yeah. For
Like,
the first 25 miles, you'd be in
yeah,
good shape with that.
yeah.
Yep.
So it's, yeah, again, knowing your terrain, knowing your course, knowing what you're going to train on, because you may be training on stuff that's totally different than what you're going to race on. So you have to think about that as well. Because you may need one shoe for where you're training, and then one shoe that you can, sometimes use, but you're going to use for race day.
Yep.
But yeah, well, there's so much, it's interesting that we're finding this crossover now, and seeing the carbon, and the foam, because this is like, I mean, the first shoe, really, the Edge is the first shoe really that I've seen that's come with the P backs as well. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah.
I know of. Yes. Yep.
Mhm. Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
again, just like those road shoes felt totally different, and you had to find out where to use them and when to use them. I think you'll find out when to use a shoe like the Endorphin Edge. I'm struggling thinking about races that are coming up, and trying to decide, when do you wear that? Do you wear that
Mhm.
at a semi-technical race that has 15,000 feet of gain?
Yeah.
You certainly wouldn't use it at a flat race that had 8,000 feet of gain.
Yeah.
So where's that sweet spot for it, because it sure does feel good running in a straight line.
That's great. That's awesome.
So going back to Bigfoot, I want to talk about one other technology, because did you end up using, and I apologize, it's been a while since I listened to the
Yeah, no
podcast
worries.
on it, but did you end up using the Olympus
Mhm.
or the Mont Blanc
I actually I used three. I used the Olympus, the Mountain Racer 2,
Mhm.
and the Mont Blanc. Yep. So
Okay,
I used all three, and for very different purposes. Um,
right. Tell
so
me what those differences were.
um so the Olympus was my workhorse. That was going to be what was going to be, keeping me right. It had good cushion, good protection, good traction. So like going over the rocks and the lava fields and stuff like that, I wasn't going to worry about my foot, right? It had, good protection for me. And then I transitioned mid race because we're going to be more on just powdered trails, right? It's not going to be as I just needed a little bit more traction just in case it got wet. So that's where I transitioned to the mountain racer, and I had more traction underfoot. Then from the mountain racer towards the end, we had basically dirt roads and road to the finish, and that's when I switched over to the Mont Blanc. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
right on. Yeah, and I think to create some differentiation for people listening and watching, the Olympus wildly cushioned.
Hmm.
It has fantastic grip on the bottom, primarily due to the fact that it again uses that Vibram Mega Grip.
Yep.
And now but here's an important differentiation. This does not use the light base Mega
Right.
Grip because while they care about weight in the Olympus, that's not the goal of the shoe.
Right.
This is your Barca lounger, right? This is your don't do no harm,
Right. Right.
and so it's just made to be durable, bulletproof, and that sort of thing. So but great traction, really nice deep treads on it, the Mega Grip on it, and then a solid upper. When you go to the and I'm sorry I don't have the Mountain Racer with me because it's been around for a season or so, but that shoe just goes down. It basically takes this model, the Olympus model, and shrinks it,
Yep.
and when you're running on that fine powder that they have out west, that not powder but fine sand,
Right.
it also has the same Mega Grip traction. It also has the deep 5 millimeter plus lugs, and it also has a bulletproof upper. It just has less of all of those things.
Yep. Yep.
And then for your last one, you went with the Mont Blanc, which is kind of Ultra's answer to the Super Shoe.
Hmm.
And I can answer your question, by the way, what you should wear at Western States. You
Okay.
should be wearing the Ultra Duo, which
Okay.
was their original Super Shoe. They don't make it anymore,
Of
but
course.
but basically the Mont Blanc is their Super Shoe and for trail. And what it is everything about it is lighter than the Olympus.
Hmm.
And so that means that it has the Mega Grip on the bottom. It has a relatively similar tread design to the Mont Blanc, but it uses the light base to get rid of some of that extra weight, and it has shallower treads on it. In fact, when this shoe came out, we joked in the store, the only place I wouldn't wear this shoe is if I were climbing Mont Blanc.
Right. Yes.
It's just
Yes.
not a shoe that I'd want to be in those aggressive, steep, rocky
Right.
climbs.
Right.
It's going to be great on your semi-aggressive trails. It's going to be great on dirt. It's going to do well there. But again, what they've done is the upper on this is a very, very thin material. It's still durable, by the way. It
Yep.
doesn't break down quickly, but it's thinner everywhere. And then it has that heel that
Hmm.
they're just trying to take weight out of it.
Yep.
And if there's a challenge on these shoes, it's again, where do you want to use it?
Hmm.
It's like looking at that edge only from a totally different perspective. And I think we're going to see that a lot with these super shoes, where people are coming out with these incredible designs that are super niche specific.
Yep.
And I think Brian meant that was kind of his challenge in that article is, yeah, we're going to have great shoes, but they're going to be great shoes for one day a year.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
you're buying them, and if it's your only shoe, they might give you some compromises elsewhere.
Yeah.
But for that one specific use, they might be the absolute perfect solution. So
Right.
um, now we get into the technology part of the Mont Blanc, and what they've done is come out with a second version of it called the
Yes.
Mont Blanc BOA. And I can't say enough about the BOA
Neither can
lacing
I.
system. It really takes things like, if you do have some movement in the heel here, if you do have some inability to dial in your lacing, the BOA system is a totally alternative lacing system that involves it. I think it started, and I'm going out on a limb here. I think it started with ski boots,
Hmm.
and moved into snowboarding, then moved into cycling, and there were some early examples in running. I know when I ran Rocky Raccoon in 2013 or 14, I actually had BOA retrofit a pair of Hoka Challengers,
Hmm.
and put the BOA system in, because I feel that strongly that it's an amazing lacing system.
Yeah.
But what it does is it uses two wheels that basically tighten ropes, very thin ropes around different portions of your foot. And over the past 2 years, La Sportiva was the first one to do this with them. They've started working really closely with the manufacturers to figure out how to best use this BOA system on the shoes. So don't think of it like shoelaces. Think of it as a part of the shoe. And some of that, I've got to admit, is just marketing for BOA, because that's what they'd like me to say. But that's how they're thinking about it. It's how the shoe manufacturers are thinking about it. And so when you come out with a shoe like the Mont Blanc and you want a perfect lacing system, I think this BOA system is it. It really locks your foot in. It's incredibly uh, you can fine tune anything on it. When you relace your shoes at maybe 50 miles into a race, you got to relace your shoes because your foot's swollen. You can literally do that within millimeters with these laces without taking any time at all to do it. So this is one of the things on this podcast that I'm just going to be totally effusive about. There's only a few shoes doing it. I think if you take the combination of all these, and I'm sorry to admit that, because I don't know how to use the internet. I never got my Speedland shipped to me, and it was late one night. I probably had a glass of wine, and I ordered a pair of Speedlands. They're a wildly prohibitive $375, and I ordered them up because I felt like I ought to know what they felt like, but I still don't. And my apologies to my friends that work with Speedland. And but what Speedland's done is taken all of what we would consider the best technologies and just stuffed them into a shoe, right?
Right.
They've got this BOA system. They've got a carbon fiber plate in it. They've got all kinds of stuff. I can't tell you whether I think it's the best shoe on the market, because there are very few shoes that cause me to absolutely cringe to pay for. But I don't think I'm going to be winning one of these epic international races this year, and so I'm going to stay away from paying 375. That's my mark. But I know that they're doing something right as far as the technology goes. So
Yeah.
anyways, just a sidebar on that, and to include a shoe that we don't sell at the store.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I think the only downside to the BOA system is it does add some weight, not so much with the BOA system, but with the overlays that it puts on.
Yeah.
And so you're, again, all different trade-offs with these super shoes.
Right.
But now you have a shoe in the BOA that it fits very, very well with
Absolutely.
the BOA system, but weighs more than the original Mont Blanc. And the Mont Blanc was designed to be the lightest weight shoe that you could have on a trail. So you've got to pick as
Give and
the
take.
wearer.
Yep.
As the wearer,
Yep.
how you're gonna, which one of these you're gonna choose.
Yeah, so I used the original version for Bigfoot at the end, and I didn't have any problems. It was fine. I will say that I would love for the heel to be a little bit snugger, as we kind of talked about earlier. It's just, like, it's hard to kind of get the laces right. I saw Jeff Browning posted a video on, taking an awe to the shoe and creating some extra eyelets, and
Which is what you should
so
do to a $200 shoe, right?
right. Yeah. So, I was like, well, I'll try it because I had an old pair. I was like, I'll try it. And I did it. And it did. It locked my foot down better. He has since taken down that video, I believe, because Altra was like, we don't think we want you posting about having to manipulate our shoes. So,
Right.
I can't find it
We'll both
anymore.
get a call later on, by the
Yeah,
way.
exactly. So, I did it with my old pair, and I was like, wow, this actually works. I got to try it prior to going to Bigfoot. So I did it with my race pair as well. And that did help lock my foot down. When I got home, my BOAs were waiting for me. So I have the Mont Blanc BOA as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first time I cranked it down, man, it's just like, it just fits like a glove. It really, I mean, I have no affiliation with Altra, but they did a really good job with that BOA system. Well, BOA and Altra, I'll say, did a really good job with creating a better fit system for the shoe. Yeah, you got, what is it, $30 more, 210? Is that right?
Yeah, I think 25 bucks, maybe 30.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. It's,
check on that. What I was going to say is
go
if you're
ahead.
going to choose this shoe,
Right.
it's probably worthwhile choosing the BOA version.
Yeah,
I
I
think that's
agree.
a good use of your funds.
Yep.
Just to dig a little bit deeper, because we do see a lot of people try this on, and I do enjoy running in the standard Mont Blanc. My experience has been that it feels like the heel. Same thing for me, the way my heel is shaped. It same thing with the carbon, Vanish Carbon. It feels like my heel is going to come out,
Mhm.
but it doesn't.
Right, right, right.
I don't have an experience of any movement at all when I'm actually running in these shoes. So again, when if you decide to try these on in the store, and the lightweight is more important to you,
Yep.
make sure you run in them a little bit. Take
Yep.
them
Yep.
outside, take them on a treadmill, run on them a little bit to see if that's going to be a game changer for you.
Yep. And I went down a half size too.
Mm-hmm.
That actually helped. Yeah, I had a half size, my normal size, which was 11 and a half in that shoe. And then, it was a little bit too roomy. So I went down to 11, and actually the 11, it felt great.
Right on.
It did really,
Even late in a 200-mile race.
even late in the 200-mile race. Yeah. I actually felt like the right size. So,
Cool.
if you put it on and it feels too roomy, try a half size down. You might be surprised. But like I said, great shoe. I'm really, really pleased with the way that one came out. Um, but we were talking before we started, and we referenced earlier, the toolbox, and like the trail. Sometimes it's a little easier to have that, one shoe fits all needs. But again, like, when we were talking earlier, my race Sunday, I went through my shoes, and I was looking at some of the ones, and, knew that in a 5-mile race, I wasn't going to wear my Olympus. And, I didn't want something with tremendous stack height or too much rigidity, because I had just turned my ankle. So I kept going through the line, and I was like, well, what am I going to feel most comfortable in? What will my foot feel the most comfortable in? And I landed down on the Zero shoe, the Zero Mesa Trail, which, it's a minimal shoe, right? There's, really just tread underfoot is really what
I
it
was gonna
is.
say you went from one extreme to the other.
I did, but when I look at it, right, I think back to my roots. I think back to cross country. What was I wearing in cross country? And I was wearing spikes, right? I like when we lined up for cross country, I was wearing spikes. In high school, it was the Nike waffle racer, right?
Yep.
So I mean, then I kind of thought about it. I held up the Mesa Trail. I was like, this is the same thing that I used to race in, because I mean, in essence, I was racing basically a 10K, right? It's like, this is the same thing I would have wore back in the day. Now, is my body the same as it was back in the day? Absolutely not. That I have to keep in mind as well. And, I
Yep.
have a slight calf tweak to prove that my body's not quite what it used to be. But, it's really meeting the demand of the situation, right? And knowing you have the right tool for that situation. So, when we talk about it, would that Mesa Trail have been appropriate at any point in Bigfoot? Probably not. I don't think I would have put that on at any point in Bigfoot. I'll be honest.
Right.
I wanted something more underfoot, more protective, more cushioning. I didn't want to feel anything.
Right.
That's for sure. So,
But that's such a good point, Aaron, because it's really important when I think about shoes to think about the attributes of the shoe,
mhm,
and not think about the brand, and not think about the marketing on it.
mhm,
Again, I'm really terrible. We have in the past reviewed shoes very in depth on YouTube, and if folks want to go check those out, you can see what I'm talking about. But you'll very rarely hear me say, this shoe is the best here, or what I'll say is this is where this aspect of the shoe shines. And so if you are doing this type of run, this may be beneficial to you.
mhm,
And so to be able to go from something like the Olympus and be comfortable saying this was a very good shoe choice for me at Bigfoot, to going to the Mesa Trail, which is just shy of being barefoot for a 5K, that if you have the ability to do that, and the financial wherewithal, that's fantastic.
right,
If
right,
you don't, find something in the middle, but make sure that it's right for the majority of what you're doing. Um, as we kind of transition out of new shoes now, and there are a couple that I missed, just to shout out some good new shoes on the market. The Mafate 4 is a fantastic, really aggressive trail shoe from Hoka. The Speed Goat just renewed in the last 6 to 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
It's as good as the Speed Goat's been, and actually gives a little bit more feel for the ground than it has in the past. The Topo Ultra Fly has upgraded to a 4. It fits differently, but maintains the same shape and same fantastic upper. And I didn't even get to one of my favorite road shoes of the season, which is the Topo Spectre, which really combines that super shoe with a nice wide toe box, and takes away some of the compromises of using P-Bucks, and surrounds it with another rubber to give you a little more stability there. So all of those are worthwhile. We just don't have time to cover everything. But what I'm excited about as we transition out is when I say this has been the year of let's get bigger, let's get crazy, let's go. I see shoes coming out in the next 9 months that temper some of that down a little bit, that I'm really excited about. I mean, you look at Saucony, who is kind of expanding they're doing another one of these brand expansions where they're kind of putting pro behind everything. But there's going to be a Kinvara Pro, a Triumph Pro, and all of that means that they're adding these materials that they wouldn't have added in the past. The Kinvara is just a perennially good training shoe that has changed comparatively little over the last decade, but uses some of the older technology because they want to keep it in that $120 price point, and they want to keep that franchise strong, which I really give them credit for. The shoe fits great. It's just a good shoe. But when they come out with a Kinvara Pro and add some of this P-backs, or add, who knows what else to it, and keep it from being a really high cushion shoe, to me, that's really interesting. Topo is coming out with, I know you've run in the Cyclone in the past, which was their kind of Topo's first shot at kind of a racy shoe. And they had some really nice aspects to it and some really not so awesome aspects to it.
Yes.
But I'm wildly excited to run in the one for next season because it uses some of these super high-end materials, but doesn't go up to 40 millimeters of stack height.
Right.
It actually doesn't use a carbon fiber plate, because they know that the science tells you the carbon fiber plate doesn't actually make you run any faster. It's the foam that made you run faster. The carbon fiber plate gives you that structural integrity. And so they're there's people, they're moving there along. So what I see next season is there some really interesting shoes that have maybe a little less cushion to them, that may not be this over the top, let's go big. Now let's take what we've learned on these really amazing shoes and bring it down to what everybody can do, and maybe a one shoe type of thing that has the best technology, that sort of thing. So I think that's really exciting, and it's a really nice jumping off point for whatever happens in the next 6 to 9 months.
Right. Well, I think it's great that shoes continue to evolve, that they continue to want to enhance the runner's performance and their experience. But I think folks need to remember that, like, the latest and greatest may not be the latest and greatest for you, right? Like, know your intentions, as we've stated in this podcast kind of over and over again, is what are your intentions for using this shoe? How often are you going to use that? Is that of value to you? Over the course of your training, because remember, race day is one day and you've got to get there, which is going to take a few months. So you want to be comfortable in your day-to-day use, right? And be able to enjoy your runs without having to, have something on your foot that you're just not enthralled with. So, make sure that you're going into folks like Nathan's shop and trying things on and asking for their expertise, right? When you look at these YouTubers, remember what they're using it for and what their foot is like, right? Like, are they a higher volume foot? Are you a narrower foot? Because if they're reviewing the shoe and they think it's the best thing ever, but they've got this really high volume foot and it's nothing like your foot, but you're getting enticed by this, then it's probably not going to be the right marriage for your foot. So remember those things as well. Anything to add there, Nathan?
No, I mean, I would definitely, the best thing you can do is try the shoe on. And I know that everybody doesn't have that opportunity. But the best thing you can do is try it on. And when you're sitting down with someone in a store, after you've tried it on and formed your opinion, see if they do any similar running to what you do. Sure. And that's an important question to ask. I think when people walk into a store, they're so intimidated by the folks working there that they think if they ask a question, they'll maybe won't sound as smart or won't sound as informed or who knows what. But if you do a little research online about the technical aspects of the shoe, and then go in and show the person in the store that you care. I know at our store we'll talk to you for hours. It's why we're here, and I hope it's why most certainly independent running stores are there. It really is an asset. But ask them, do they do what you do? You may walk into a running store where they are just exceptionally fast 5K runners on the road, and all you're going to do is go out and run a 15-minute mile on the trails. Their experience is not your experience.
Right.
And so it's okay to ask those questions. And it's, the secret here is that there's nobody running 7-minute miles in a 100-miler. There's just not. I used to listen to the movies where, these elite athletes would be like, oh, I was doing a 7-minute mile and then this guy shot past me. And those of us that have run them know that that's just not accurate. So sit down and say, okay, I'm going to be running a 10-minute mile, a 15-minute mile, a 20-minute mile. I'm going to walk Yeti and I'm going to finish in 36 hours. And that's awesome. But your needs are very different than Olivier LeBlanc, who's chucking out a 12:50 there or whatever Olivier does. And so just be sure to talk to people about it. And then also I just think we threw out that like Power Run PB, and I tried to use that as an example of marketing, that it's Power Run throughout the Saucony line. But some of that Power Run is just amazing materials, and some of it is them trying to sell a really good shoe that just doesn't happen to have the most expensive material ever made in it. And so if you're watching reviews that are more in depth than what Aaron and I have done today, and they start throwing out every single buzzword that's on the side of a shoe, my guess is they probably haven't run in it too much. They've just heard the same material that their rep told them, and they're repeating it for YouTube. So talk to people that run in it and enjoy that.
Absolutely. All great points. Nathan, as always, it's been awesome. It's so fun talking to you.
I'm gonna put down my bike and my mic and get rid of my soapbox, I think, after that little last diatribe.
It's all good. I certainly appreciate your honesty and your feedback on this. It's been a great conversation. So thank you, buddy.
Well, I always have fun with this. I was incredibly impressed with your Bigfoot finish. That was pushing the limits of what you've done before, and so proud to see you finish from someone that maybe didn't finish something that long this year. It's wonderful to see the tenacity that goes into that, as well as knowing a number of your athletes and what you're doing with them is spectacular right now. So, hey, so anyone that's listening that's made it to this point, Aaron's got a Patreon page and he makes some dough on that. I'm not paid to be here. I didn't pay him to get me on here to talk about my store. So throw him a couple bucks on Patreon, and it'll help him, make sure that mic's still running and he's putting out great information. So if you don't say it, Aaron,
I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate everything you do. And thanks everybody for listening and paying some attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.